The election campaign, the focus remains on the cost of living. We've been hearing about wage rises, or at least wages not rising, for the better part of the last 5 years. Both sides are promising to be better. Joining me now is the Shadow Minister for Women and Education, Tanya Plibersek. Thanks so much for your time. Let's talk about the economy. Can business honestly really afford to be giving wage rises in this economy at the moment with all the headwinds?
Well, Laura, the government says that low wages are a deliberate design feature of their economic management, and Labor doesn't agree with that. We know that low wages really put pressure on the cost of living. Wages haven't been keeping up with inflation for years now. The latest inflation figures you saw really have shown how much harder it is for families to make ends meet. But low wages is not really a great thing for our whole economy, because if someone doesn't have $5 in their pocket, they don't know if they've got a job next week, they're not going to spend a bit of money buying a cup of coffee on the way to work or take the kids out for pizza on a Friday night. That means that aggregate demand across our economy is weaker if wages are going backwards and the cost of living is going through the roof. We want to see, when businesses do well, some of that benefit passed on to their staff in the form of higher wages. And of course, the Fair Work Commission takes into account sort of what's happening across the economy, what's happening in individual industries. We know that some businesses are doing it tough. We do need to take a sensible approach here, but low wages are not the solution. And at the moment, everything's going up, but people's wages. We need to make sure that wages can grow sensibly, and we take other cost of living pressures off families as well. Childcare is a great example here, because you have lower fees every day, every week, you're saving money that way, but it also means that parents are able to work that extra day a week or more hours in the day, so they help the family budget in another way as well. Looking for things like cheaper childcare, lower power bills, lower costs of medicines, lower costs of electric vehicles, so you can save money on petrol and repairs and so on. All of these things will take pressure off the family budget, as well as seeing sensible rises in pay when we can.
Yeah.
Can I just say one other thing about the economy? Employers are more able to afford wage rises when the productivity of their business increases. That's just common sense. One of the biggest blocks we've seen on productivity improvements in the Australian economy in recent years is the absolute hash this government has made of education and training. We have a skills shortage right around Australia. Employers say they'd love to put on more people. They can't find the skilled staff. Labor's investment in schools and TAFE and universities is a really good way of helping employers as well improve the productivity of their businesses.
But that is not going to help them now. We're talking about small businesses who are the same businesses who have families that need to pay for all those things you just talked about, and they just can't find either labour or skilled labour. At what point is either major party going to be honest and start talking about the need for immediate overseas migration, more people from overseas coming to fill these jobs now?
Well, skilled migration has always been a part of Australia's economy, and it will continue to be, but it shouldn't be a replacement for training Australians. And what we've seen since the election of the Liberal government, we've got about 60,000 fewer apprentices and trainees today than when the Liberals left office. Every single year that they've been in office, than when Labor left office, every single year that the Liberals have been in government, there have been fewer apprentices and trainees than the last year of the last Labor government. We've seen about $3 billion cut from TAFE and training. We've seen more kids turned away from Australian universities than any time since the big university cuts in 2014 from onwards. So we're seeing more people missing out on an education than getting an education under this government. They're turning people away from TAFE and from university at a time when we need skilled workers across the economy. Everywhere I go, I agree with you, Laura, everywhere I go, employers say to me that they need more skilled staff. They could open more days, they could open more hours if they found the staff they need. This skills crisis is one that has been building for years, and it's only COVID exposing it that has made it so acute at the moment. But it comes on the back of years of underinvestment from this government. So yes, of course, skilled migration will be a part of Australia's economic story, but we cannot drop the ball on education and training the way this government has and expect to have a strong economy.
No, but you have to deal with the cards you dealt, and you can't make up that skills training in just a couple of months. In the meantime, what do? No one is willing to talk about overseas migration in any real way. Universities are saying an extra 1,000 student doctors are going to be needed a year to avert a crisis in our health and hospital system. So what is that short-term solution?
Yeah, we've got shortages right across the economy. Doctors, nurses, psychologists, social workers, engineers, IT specialists, IT security in particular. In trades, we've got shortages across building trades. We've got shortages in hospitality and tourism. We've got, there isn't, as you say, Laura, there's not an overnight solution. But I'll tell you what's making it worse right now is the fact that there are 60,000 fewer apprentices and trainees today than when Labor left office, and that has been that number has been accumulating over the whole term of this government. They've been training too few apprentices and trainees, and at university level, too few people in those professions where we've got skills shortages. That's why Labor's got a plan for 465,000 free TAFE places and 20,000 extra university places. Doctors are a really great example. We continue to rely in many parts of Australia on overseas trained doctors. Of course, we should be giving more young Australians the opportunity of having this great career. We need to start now if we're going to address this crisis in years to come. And yes, as I say, skilled migration has to be part of the conversation now. We do need to have a sensible conversation with business, with unions and other interested parties about sensible levels of skilled migration, but it is not a replacement for training Australians. This government has consistently for years used migration as a replacement for training Australians for jobs that in some cases have had skills shortages for years.
Well, let's talk about teachers. Teachers, Stuart Roberts says, will now need to complete numeracy and literacy tests before enrolling in a university or training course. That's a good idea.
Yeah, it is a good idea. It's a good idea that Labor announced already, so it's great to see the government following what we've already committed to do. And this is a government, obviously, that's been there for almost a decade, and they're waiting till just before an election to make what is a common sense announcement that Labor's made already. And we do need to make sure that our teachers know how to read and write and do maths before we send them into the classroom. And there's no point starting a degree if you're not going to be able to read and write and do maths at the end of the degree. That said, I also think it's important. We want to be attracting the best and brightest into teaching. We want to be taking our teaching students from the top 30% of academic achievers. We want to make sure that teaching is a respected and valued profession. So we need a minister that doesn't call public school teachers duds, as Stuart Roberts did a few weeks ago. We need parents and students to respect teachers as well. But that initial test to make sure that they can read and write and do maths before they start their teaching degree, that's a good idea. We want to make sure that we are also providing pathways for people, mature age people who've had other jobs in the past. We want people in their 30s and 40s to think about teaching as a career because they bring with them life experience and professional experience outside of school. So we need alternate pathways into teaching degrees too.
All right, we're just seeing Anthony Albanese in Sydney. He is touring around Darling Harbour. He's looking at some renewable projects. Before we let you go, we will be live to his media conference soon. Scott Morrison also due up at the same time. But before we let Tanya Plibersek go, I just want to ask you about the Hunter debate that I hosted yesterday. It seems that Dan Rapopoli is saying one thing, Chris Bowen is saying another. So what is the truth of it? Will mines in the Hunter Valley pay this levy under Labor's safeguard mechanism? Who's right?
Okay. Well, first of all, Laura, there's no automatic levy, right? The safeguard mechanism, the government's safeguard mechanism, works to say that you're allowed to admit a certain amount of pollution. If you bring down the amount of pollution that you're emitting, you don't pay anything. And so we really want to see businesses reduce their carbon pollution. 2/3 of the businesses that are covered by this mechanism already have a target to reach zero net emissions. They're already taking action themselves. And it's worth reminding people that the 215 businesses that are covered by this are exactly the same as those covered by the government. You know, it's the same mechanism, it's the same list.
Well, no,
of
you have a
businesses.
penalty.
Scott Morrison, Matt Canavan, all these people. Well, no, there is. We have an objective to reach zero net emissions, and as I say, 2/3 of businesses are already on track to do that. If they reduce their emissions, then they don't pay any penalty. And we've got billions of dollars on offer to help businesses reduce their pollution and meet their targets. Those businesses that are emissions intensive and trade exposed, so they've got international competitors, will have tailored arrangements for them. We don't want any Australian business to be disadvantaged internationally. So those 215 businesses, as I say, are exactly the same businesses as covered by the government's safeguards mechanism. And I think the extraordinary thing about this, Laura, is we're still debating this because we've got a government that, despite having 22 different climate and energy policies, hasn't really landed one. And we've got Matt Canavan at one end of the country saying, it's all the vibe, zero net emissions is dead, it doesn't really matter, nobody cares. And we've got people like Dave Sharma here in Sydney or Josh Frydenberg in Melbourne saying, no, it's a very strict target and we're absolutely going to get there. They still can't agree. After almost a decade in government, we have a government that is completely divided on whether they are even aiming to achieve zero net carbon emissions. And we've got the National Party and the Liberals fighting each other. We've got the Nationals actually fighting internally about their targets. It is a mess. We've got a government that cannot even decide its actual existing climate and energy policy.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. We'll get to both the leaders on the campaign. Tanya Plibersek, thank you for your time this morning.